Hello and welcome back to L07 Arts. Today we're going to be going over how to make a ghostly spectre in Houdini. This effect isn't too hard to pull off and is easy enough to switch up depending on your needs. This is my first attempt at making a tutorial, so bear with me. If anything seems unclear, feel free to leave a comment and I'll do my best to clear it up. If you find this video helpful, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I also wouldn't mind seeing what you end up making with this technique. All that said, let's get started. Let's begin with a fresh scene. We start by bringing in our model and animation. To simplify things, I'll be using Craig this time, but any model will do. Be sure to unpack the model so we can make full use of it. We need two sources, the animated version and a rest state. This setup is important for differentiating your moving geometry from the static in order to give you the best results further down. We will want to make a group on the rest state side, set to points, and named appropriately. This group will be important later on. We then merge the two together. If your model doesn't have a rest state, or you are doing the animation yourself, just be sure the rest group is applied before the animation, or use a time shift to freeze the model on an appropriate frame. This will give you the base setup that is needed. If you want to isolate the animation side for use elsewhere, simply blast the rest group and drop down a null. Next we want to add a facet and be sure to turn on pre-compute normals. The next step is setting up a peak. You don't want to set it too high, just enough to offset the surface. 0.008 or so is a good place to start. From there we'll be adding a mountain node to create the ghostly shimmer. This one can be touchy, so you'll need to adjust the settings until you are happy with the results. Turn on the animated noise and mess around with things until you have a result with just enough movement to be noticeable without distorting the model too much or collapsing in on itself. Find the settings that are right for you. Now we throw down a split and separate out the rest group. Invert the selection to keep things nice and organized. Time to add a Pyro source node. Connect the first input to our animation side, and run the rest group into the second input. I like to put down a time freeze on frame 1 just in case. Set the mode to surface scatter, and initialize the type to smoke, so that it will have density and temperature. Next we'll be setting up our surface group. This one will dictate the overall look of our ghost. Set it to points and undo base group. The one we need is keep by normal. We want the points to come down from above and in front, as well as lowering the spread angle enough to get a nice outline. We don't need too much, just enough for the highlights. From here we start down another path. Make a peak and relative reference to our first peak, then invert the value by adding a minus before the code. Next add a trail SOP and set it to compute velocity. This will be our base geo for collision and setting the ghost's interior. To further refine it, we will need a VDB from polygon. Scale down the voxel size until the model's features are fairly defined. Beware, the lower the value, the more memory it will take up. This value is going to be important elsewhere, so make sure to highlight this node so that you won't have to search for it. Copy the voxel size and reference it across to our Pyro source in the particle separation value. Be sure to add null outputs for both the geo and VDB so that we can reference them elsewhere. Next we make another group called inside group. Set it to points and switch the mode to bounding volume, then plug our VDB into the second input. Now blast the surface group and set it to delete non-selected. This leaves us with only our highlight areas. One more blast, this time the inside group. This takes out any points overlapping the collision space and makes it easier to project our highlights. Add a point velocity and set the velocity to 1 in the Y direction. Now we're going to add a volume rasterize attributes. Get our voxel size from the VDB and reference it into the voxel size here. Set the attributes to density, temperature, and V. Scroll down and turn on clamp by coverage. Finally add a null and set it to our outsource. Alright, back up to the top so we can make another path. Another VDB from polygon. Plug it into the animation side of the split. Get our voxel size again and reference it here, but this time we're going to do something different. We're going to times it by 2 and set the mode to fog to generate density. Add a null and call it something like body VDB. It's time for the main event. Drop in a DOP network and let's get started. Dive inside and let's build our network. Start with a Pyro solver, add a smoke object, and switch it to multi-field. Be sure to give it a name that will be easy to find. Next is a gas resize fluid dynamic. Plug it into the second input. Now a volume source into our last input. Set the SOP path to our source object and initialize source smoke. By default, it says it is set to smoke, so you'll need to switch to something else and switch back to make it work. There should be 3 fields for density, temperature, and V under the operations heading. Give the volume a name so it'll be easier to keep track of. For now, we're going to add another volume source for the body. Link it up and do the same thing again for our body VDB. You can leave it unconnected for the time being, and we'll get back to it later. Time to start adjusting our settings. In our smoke object, expand the field size by a decent amount, enough to cover our scene. Next, go to the source volume and copy the address to our SOP path. In the center fields, type the following and paste the address. Be sure to close the quotes before adding comma, 0, end bracket. It should be like you see on the screen. Copy the full line and paste it into the other 2 fields, changing the file number to 1 and 2 respectively. If it works, all the fields should turn green. This will keep the simulation centered on our ghost the whole way through. Now go back into the Y field and add a reference to the size Y and times it by 0.4. This will move everything up so that we can capture the smoke as it rises. We're still not seeing anything yet, so let's add our parameters. Set the density field to density, same with the diffuse field. Let's up the density scale a bit and set the emission field to temperature with a value of 1 in the scale. Lastly, let's be sure it's working by going to the Creation tab and setting it to solve on creation frame. Ah, there it is. Bit too blurry right now, so let's up the division size. This is the one that will eat up a lot of memory, so be careful. If it takes too long to process, raise the value until you have everything else in place. Now that we can see it, find a color scheme you like. We can add color to our diffuse ramp from a variety of templates, and this is purely for visualization, so it won't matter outside of here. When you're ready, copy the division value and reference it across to the voxel size of our main VDB. This will automatically update all relevant fields everywhere else while letting you control it inside the simulation. Back inside the simulation, we can adjust our gas resizer. Set the max bounds to the base geo. This will keep us from simulating any more than we need to at any one time. It is a very important step on cutting back the processing time. Next, we can run a practice sim of how things stand. Not too much going on right now, so let's merge in our body volume. Much more ghostly, but it can be better. Over on our Pyro solver, let's start adjusting a few settings. Drop the cooling rate to 0.05 and add a bit of viscosity. Turn off combustion, we don't need it. Raise our dissipation a bit, and turn on turbulence. Let's just mess with the settings a bit for now, we can refine it all later. Next, we'll be bringing in our collisions. Drop a merge under our solver, add a ground plane, Shift R to switch the threads to the appropriate sides, add another merge, and our static object. Bring in our base geo. Set the collision type to volume solver and the mode to volume sample, then bring in our VDB for the proxy volume. Also be sure to turn on deforming geometry or else it will not move. You can hide the display geo and hit play. Here's our ghosty. You can up the density scale if it's hard to see, and the shadow scale for a bit more detail. Next we can throw in a gas wind for a bit more movement along the X, and plug it into the velocity input of our solver. Changing the timescale will make it a bit more otherworldly. From here it's just a matter of messing with the settings and trying out different things until you find a look you like. Give it a try with a bunch of different settings and see how each one looks. If you want things to blend more, try upping the sub-steps, but keep in mind this will also increase the simulation time for each added step that it needs to process. On to the finishing stages. Once you have the look you like, and have adjusted the sub-steps and division size to where you need them to be, put down a DOP import field. This node lets you grab the export data from the DOP and turn it into something usable. Simply drag the DOP net into the top 2 fields, hit slash, and select your smoke object from the list. Then set the presets to smoke. There should be 5 fields: density, vel, rest, temperature, and CD. We only really need density, vel, and temperature. The import field should come in with a file cache, name it appropriately, and hit save. This will take a while to cache to disk, but it's better to do it here than to keep loading a fresh simulation every time you go to do something. You can also save multiple versions if you ever feel like going back and changing the simulation. Once that is done, it is time to add a Pyro bake volume. This will let us give our ghost a visible look, as well as create a material for use in rendering. Set up your density scale to around what you were using before, and turn on the fire, but drop its intensity by a lot. Here you can bring in the same kinds of colors as you were using before. You can switch the smoke to color ramp, as well as make adjustments until you have the look that you want. Once you are done, you can go to Quick Setup and get it to create a material. This is helpful because it allows us to continue editing the Pyro bake while also applying those same settings to the active material. Set up your out null and put the flag on it, and we're ready for render. Now I won't be going over setting up the lighting and render settings, so you'll have to figure those out for yourself, but this should get you started. And that is how we make a ghost. Thank you for watching. This was the first ever tutorial I tried to make. Odds are there are things that I could have done better, but I hope you've made it this far without too much trouble. There will be a link to an example file in the description below. If there's anything you're unsure of, please leave a comment and I'll try and clear it up. Otherwise let me know what you thought about it, and tell me how I can improve. I can't wait to see what kind of ghost people make with this. I'm sure they will be interesting. I'd love to see what you create. If this video does well, I do have some other tutorial ideas I've been kicking around that I wouldn't mind trying to make, so be sure to subscribe. While you're here, feel free to take a look at some of the other content I have produced, and let me know what you think. I'm sure there will be something that will catch your interest. Thanks again, and see you in the next video.